Is a fence even worth building if the people on the other side can simply build another road? Huawei says that it trained a 505 billion parameter open model from first token to last with zero NVIDIA silicon. Here's the claim I'll stand behind. No matter how much effort is put into building and reinforcing these fences, increasing intelligence will continue to show entire industries and countries how to route around them. Come with me, let's get into it. Huawei has released openPangu 2.0 Pro, an open-weight model with 505 billion total parameters. It uses a mixture of experts design, so 18 billion parameters are active at any time. It has a 512,000 token content window. Huawei trained it on 34 trillion tokens with the Muon optimizer. Now here's the part that changes the whole map. Huawei trained the model from its first token to its last on Ascend 910B neural processing units. No NVIDIA chip took part. Ascend is Huawei's answer to NVIDIA's AI accelerators. The company built the line as US export controls cut China off from NVIDIA's top chips. That makes openPangu an open-weight model above 500 billion parameters that Huawei says was trained entirely outside the NVIDIA ecosystem. Its weights, inference code, and technical report are live now through Gitcode and Huawei's cloud model arts. Now, this is a bigger step than the one we saw a couple months ago when we reported on this back on June 6th. Back then, Huawei's Ascend 910C chips completed the post-training run for DeepSeek V4 Pro. Post-training takes an existing model and tunes it. openPangu started from scratch. The Ascend stack carried the whole training run. That is the genuine milestone. Now, for the supply chain beneath it, because the independent story has a very large footnote here. Some Ascend parts reportedly used 7 nanometer dies made by TSMC, while roughly 2.9 million such dies were ordered by SoftGo. Those dies moved through a shell company chain around SoftGo before the diversion was caught. So TSMC now faces a US commerce penalty above $1 billion. The memory came from Samsung. Huawei had stockpiled around 13 million high-bandwidth memory stacks before controls tightened. Those foreign supply banks are now reportedly dwindling. No publicly documented frontier training run has yet combined logic made by SMIC with memory from CXMT from end to end. So assuming this is all true, China has just proven that it can train without NVIDIA. It hasn't yet proven, though, that it can do so with a fully domestic fabrication and memory chain. That's presumably the next step. And the performance gap is also very real. Ascend inference runs at roughly 17 to 19 or so tokens per second. Comparable NVIDIA parts clear 25. And analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations estimate that leading US chips are about 5 times more capable than China's best domestic alternatives. They project that lead could grow to 17-fold by 2027 if Chinese fabrication keeps falling behind. Even switching an existing workflow does carry a cost. RAND analysts found that iFlyTek absorbed a 3-month delay just moving its training onto Ascend. And China's legal structure is important to think about here too. Chinese companies must, in the law's words, support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence work in accordance with the law. Now, that does give users a sound reason to question systems controlled through a Chinese company's servers. However, open weights change that trust problem. Anyone assuming sufficient compute can download openPangu, inspect it, and run it locally without handing their work back to Huawei. The rest of China's AI sector is taking several routes at once. Moonshot's Kimi still runs on 20,000 NVIDIA chips leased through Alibaba. DeepSeek plans a 1 gigawatt data center campus in Inner Mongolia. So, the export fence has not produced one clean break. It has produced a scramble across chips, memory, software, power, and supply routes. The restrictions have slowed access to the best hardware, but they've also created the pressure, the funding, and the urgency for a rival stack. Analysts cited in the reporting concluded that the export control has largely backfired. That judgment fits what Huawei just demonstrated. The fence still imposes costs, and the missing domestic supply chain could become a serious limit, but the capability it was meant to contain keeps moving. And now it's downloadable. All right, that race to own the whole AI stack now moves beyond China and into the United States. Europe and South Korea are putting public money into the physical ground where frontier AI runs. On July 30th, the European Commission opened bidding for 7 AI gigafactory hubs. The full program is worth roughly 30 billion euros. Gigafactory here means a giant, publicly backed data center or supercomputing cluster. So think concrete transformers, cooling systems, and tens of thousands of accelerators. 4 of the planned sites would hold between 25,000 and 75,000 chips. Each can receive up to 1 billion euros in support. The other 3 would carry between 40,000 and 100,000 chips apiece, with up to 2 billion euros available for each hub. Germany, Greece, Portugal, Italy, and Spain are backing bids for those largest sites. The Commission expects to name the winning groups early next year, and then they'll have 18 months to build. But that timetable, of course, runs straight into a memory shortage. A handful of major data center buyers have already locked up most available memory capacity through 2028. Public funding can preserve land and order machines, but it cannot instantly create the missing supply. Still, this is a meaningful turn for a bloc that spent years renting frontier capacity from 3 American hyperscalers. Europe now wants to finance and physically host more of that capacity itself. South Korea made a related move during the same week, too. The country plans to inject 20 trillion won, around $13.9 billion, into the Korea Investment Corporation. Now, that is South Korea's wealth fund. For the first time, its mandate explicitly includes domestic AI and data center assets. The design came just after a sharp rout in technology stocks, which makes the long-term intent clearer. Korea is treating the infrastructure as a strategic base rather than a passing market trade. Now, we have watched countries begin to own their models. Switzerland released Apertus with open weights, and on July 31st, Korea's National AI Foundation project released LG's 750 billion parameter K-EXO1 2.0 under an Apache 2.0 license. This next step goes underneath the model, though. It finances the machines, the buildings, the power, and the cooling that keeps a sovereign model from becoming a file with nowhere affordable to run. These bids are still procurement notices. No hub is finished, no promised access should be counted on before the machines actually arrive. But if these projects land, then researchers, hospitals, universities, and startups across 2 continents will have more paths to frontier compute. Fewer of those paths will need approval from a small set of companies across an ocean. Compute is starting to look less like a private luxury and more like basic scientific infrastructure, and that shift may matter more than the spending totals. All right, from the machines beneath AI, we move to the human conversation feeding it. Reddit is now challenging the economics of AI answers in court and at the negotiating table. On the legal front, U.S. District Judge Paul A. Engelmeyer largely denied SERP AI's request to dismiss Reddit's lawsuit. Reddit plausibly alleged that SERP AI and Perplexity AI worked together to pull copyrighted Reddit material out of Google search results. In Reddit's account, SERP AI supplied the technology that got around the access controls, and Perplexity paid for the resulting feed. That keeps Reddit's conspiracy claim alive under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The legal route is really clever because it steps around the unsettled fight over whether AI training counts as fair use. The fight that has been raging recently, as you know if you follow us here on Century Report. Reddit is targeting the technology used to bypass a control. And less than 2 weeks before this, another court dismissed Google's similar scraping case. Google could not show that copyright holders had authorized it to stop scraping on their behalf. Reddit cleared the bar that Google missed because it sued over the circumvention of its own controls. Now, the case still has an awkward fact inside it, though. The technology at issue appeared more than a year after Reddit and Google signed their licensing deal. So Judge Engelmeyer acknowledged that timing and still found Reddit's account plausible enough to proceed. SERP AI says the lawsuit seeks to wall off the open internet. That's their claim. And that concern does deserve weight. The web weakens when large platforms can place public conversation behind private licensing gates. Search, archiving, research, and small independent services, not to mention AI itself, all depend on public pages remaining usable. Openness, though, does not require letting a powerful answer layer summarize other people's work, keep the audience, and leave the source with shrinking traffic. And that is the second front in Reddit's fight. During its second quarter earnings discussion, CEO Steve Huffman voiced his first public doubt about the company's relationship with Google's AI overviews. Those are the generated answers that appear just above the regular search results, as you know. Huffman said, "We are still looking for that win-win option." Reddit's investor letter went even further. It called the platform the antidote to an automated web and argued that people don't want a summary of Reddit, they want Reddit. The strongest support for that concern comes from human behavior. A Pew study of roughly 900 US adults found that AI overviews cut clicks to source sites by nearly half compared with the old list of blue links. But those clicks are how publishers and community platforms turn attention into revenue. When Google answers the question before a person visits the source, then Google keeps the user while the originator loses much of the economic return. Now, Reddit is reportedly considering whether to end its $60 million Google licensing deal. The Economist, Reuters, Politico, and USA Today are all also reevaluating similar arrangements. And this gets to the heart of the dispute. AI can compress thousands of human conversations into one quick answer. That creates real value for the person asking the question. But it can also compress away the income that keeps those conversations available. So Reddit's lawsuit won't settle the entire very complicated question. It does show that the people and the communities supplying the answer are beginning to price what that layer once treated as free. All right, our last story leaves quartz and chip supply chains behind, and it starts with an old problem in optics and a wonderfully direct response. Use more eyes. A UC Berkeley team led by Laura Waller with lead author Kevin C. Joe built a microscope from 48 separate camera sensors. Their work appears in Nature Photonics. Software stitches the sensors together into one seeing system. The result captures 25.2 billion pixels every second, and it holds 3-micron resolution across 5 square centimeters while recording at 120 frames per second. Each of those numbers has been reached before, but the breakthrough is reaching all 3 at once. Microscopes have always forced a choice. Zoom in, and you see fine detail across a tiny patch. You pull back, and you see the whole specimen, but with less detail. You add speed, and the compromise gets even worse. Optical designers have long treated that triangle of resolution, field of view, and frame rate as a fixed cost of just seeing small things. But the Berkeley team spread the work across commodity image sensors and let reconstruction software resolve the combined view. They demonstrated the system on living C. elegans, transparent roundworms around 1 millimeter long. These worms are a standard model in developmental biology. The microscope followed many individual worms moving across the full field while still resolving cellular details inside each one. And that changes the kind of question that a scientist can even ask. When you can watch only one worm or one patch of tissue, you study individuals and you have to extrapolate. When you can watch a whole population at video speed, then variation becomes visible. You can see how a culture responds to a drug, for example. You can compare developmental timing across a group. You have a better chance of catching the rare cell that behaves differently from thousands around it. Now, this remains a research instrument. It isn't a clinical scanner headed into hospitals right now. But what the team has demonstrated is a new route toward whole organism cellular imaging. The gain came from linking cheap sensors with computation rather than waiting for one exquisitely engineered lens to do everything alone. A physical limit that looked fixed turned out to belong to an old design. 48 ordinary eyes, joined by code, could see past it. All right, let's close it out for today. A fence can still delay a crossing, yes, but today showed what happens after the delay. Huawei does remain behind the best NVIDIA hardware, and its foreign chip and memory stockpiles are depleted. But the export regime also pushed an entire alternative training stack into existence. The first 500 billion parameter open model trained without NVIDIA is now available to download. Europe and South Korea are answering concentration at another layer too. They're moving to own more of the compute beneath their models instead of renting every critical machine from a few overseas companies. Reddit is testing whether an answer layer can keep compressing human conversation while the communities and the publishers beneath it lose the audience. The legal theory is unsettled. The lost clicks are already measurable. And Berkeley's microscope shows the same pattern in miniature. A single lens faced a 3-way limit, and an array of commodity sensors and reconstruction code found another route. Now, the old arrangement in each story still does have power. Export controls impose real costs. Private compute owners still dominate. Search platforms still hold the audience, and precision optics still do matter. But none of those positions look permanent anymore. Capability keeps finding new channels. Public investment can widen who owns the infrastructure. Originators can demand a share of the value that they create. Computation can lift limits that once looked like simple physics. When the fence fails, the important question is who gets through. And today's evidence points toward more builders, more places, more access, and more ways to see. See you tomorrow.